Dubey sir, you can start right now.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back this Sunday again. Uh, the speaker this morning is Mr. Michael Mendizza. You have heard him earlier, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to Michael and also want to express my thankfulness for accepting our invitation and to come and speak before this group. Michael is going to talk on living the teachings. Most of us know Michael, but for those who are hearing Michael for the first time, I'll briefly introduce Michael. Mr. Michael Mendizza is an entrepreneur, author, educator, documentary filmmaker, and founder of Touch the Future, focusing on optimizing human potential, beginning with the parent-child relationship. Michael's close relationship with Krishna began in 70s. He directed The Challenge of Change, the first feature documentary on the life of Krishnamurti, produced by Evelyn Blau, followed by a steady stream of projects, recording the public talks in the Oak Grove, and a second film with the Silent Mind, Beyond Myth and Tradition, a collection of over 100 first generation interviews, the publication of the book Flowering. Drawing on the first generation interviews, a new and educational series also titled Unconditionally Free is being produced. Michael is the author of Always Awakening, Buddha's Realization, Krishnamurti's Insight with Rinpoche Samdong, the first Prime Minister of Tibet in exile in India. Michael's close friendship and mentor relationship with Joseph Hilton Pierce began in the early 90s. He authored Magical Parent, Magical Child, The Art of Joyful Parenting with Joseph Pierce, and Astonishing Capacities and Self-Inflicted Limitations, a summary anthology of Pierce's collected insights. So, uh, I want to thank Michael once again for being with us today. And Michael, you have been here. You can take as long as you want, but maybe perhaps an hour, leaving about 20-25 minutes for people to ask questions. So you can begin now. Yes, Michael.
Thank you very much. It's always both intimidating to speak to such a tenured audience, and also it's a great opportunity to share some insights that these last 40 years have kind of blossomed in me. I have to say that this theme of living the teachings has been a personal passion of mine for the last year or so. I metaphorically feel like it's the elephant in the room with the Krishnamurti teachings and foundations and so on and so forth. This is a subject that is so important to everything that Krishnaji did, and yet it's often not looked at or dealt with or really even discussed very much compared to all the rest of the kinds of things that are going on. So it's wonderful to be here and to be able to kind of ring the bell and spark some interest, maybe be a little provocative. I remember quite well sitting in Brockwood with Kay at lunch, and this was when we were doing the Challenge of Change, and you know, he said, you know, I've only said one thing my whole life, but I've said it 1,000 ways. And he said, he followed that by saying, you know, this is so damn simple, he said. Basically, a child should be able to get what we're talking about. And yet, as we will see with some of the interviews and things, there's something about what the essence of what Krishnaji was talking about that is and remains elusive, almost unseen, you know, unseen. So I like to say that, you know, I compare what we call the teachings, Krishnaji's 250,000 pages of metaphors, It's similar to being a menu on a lunch menu when you go to lunch. So you have all the descriptions of what the salad is and what's for lunch and what's for the dessert and so on and so on. You have all these descriptions. But then there's eating the lunch. And the eating the lunch is living what the menu called the teachings are inviting. So from my standpoint, the real purpose and only purpose for this huge body of work and all the YouTubes and all the publications and all the books is to live the teachings. So that's my position. Certainly the teachings have a place in awakening attention and having people look at things that they may not have looked at. But in that looking, there needs to be a conversion. I'm using the word conversion of metaphor into personal insight. A conversion from the word into a direct experience of what the word is describing. And if that conversion takes place, frankly, everything that's being described becomes quite obvious. It's very clear what Kay is describing. There's no need to sit there and watch and read 10,000 more pages. You have the insight. You see in yourself what's being described, or you don't. And it remains then in the more intellectual, academic, metaphoric realm or state. So you have two basic states of mind. You have a metaphoric state where you have words and the images that words create, which is what Kay would say the description, and then you have the direct experience, which is what is being described. In the 20s, he used a wonderful illustration. He said, you're driving up a road and there's a billboard, a big sign on the road that says, over to the right is like the Grand Canyon. And people park their cars and they stare at the sign and they even worship it, he says. They worship the sign, but they never go experience what the sign is inviting. And I think that is quite true for many, if not most people who encounter Krishnamurti's work. So this was a key issue for him his whole life. And we're using the word living the teachings as this conversion of metaphor into direct personal experience or insight. So that's the basic idea or premise that I have. I wrote these notes, which we sent out, and I hope are available, because I tried to be, I want to spend most of my time not me talking, however I'm happy to do so, but I have a series of wonderful clips that I'd like to share with you from these, some of my very favorites that I think hone in on what we're talking about today. And I'd like to give as much time as we can to have you experience these clips, and then we can kind of discuss what those have. So I want to leave as much time as possible to be sure that you get to experience these clips of interviews that I have set for you. Basically, this difference between metaphor and direct experience is similar to the Buddhist tradition of the two states, one called the absolute or the unconditioned state, the Buddha mind, if you will. And then there's the relative state, which is what most of us spend most of our life in, which includes words, symbols, language, memory, conditioned, blah, blah, blah. So you have those two. And I think early on, Krishnaji used the word truth to represent this unconditioned state. And I'm going to re-emphasize state. It's a state of the mind. It's not content or ideas or concepts. It's a state. So being in a state of unconditioned is different than a state that is occupied with what is conditioned. So this is fundamental to the whole essence of it. And living the teachings is moving out of the conditioned realm or state, and literally, like turning on the light in a dark room, being in an unconditioned state. And it's a different quality of attention, etc., etc. So ideally, given the quality of attention that Kay was inviting, he would be using metaphor to point something out and then it's up to the listener to experience in themselves what the metaphor is pointing to. And this is this conversion from metaphor to insight that I think is at the heart of what Krishnaji's whole life was about. Unfortunately, I think most people stay in the metaphor, and very few actually have a silent mind or actually experience this state, this unconditioned state. Failing this conversion that I'm talking about, then we stay in the intellect, or it could be, you could call it the ego, you could call it the conditioned state, you can call it language, you can call it culture. All of those things are there. With this conversion, if this conversion takes place, there is a realization in the listener of what's being described, and something magic happens that transforms them. And this was basically what Kay was looking at for his whole life. So I would say that the phrase "truth is a pathless land" applies equally to Kay's teachings, what we call the teachings, as it does to everybody else's teaching. So in many ways, without this conversion, Kay's teachings are no different than the TS's teachings or Buddha's teachings or anybody else's teachings, because all of those things exist in this cognitive conceptual realm or state of mind. And all of them have to go in order to experience what Krishnaji was inviting. And I would say again that and that's why I've asked if Dr. Krishna was present in 1977 when Krishnaji asked all of the trustees or major trustees with all the foundations to gather for a month in Ojai. And they did that, and he specifically said at that time that the teachings are not in the books. The teachings are not in the videotapes. Those are dead. And I would like to emphasize the fact that media and technology are dead. They are not alive. They are dead. And so they cannot contain something that is alive. So fundamentally, the books and the videos and all that is really pointing to something that's alive, and that's where this conversion takes place. And I suggest that at that meeting in 77, he challenged the various trustees and the various foundations to give as much emphasis to living the teachings as we give to archiving and publishing and et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that has taken place. And this has been my little crusade for the last year, was encouraging the foundations to finally adopt and take that challenge of exploring together. It doesn't mean you're going to prescribe what living the teachings is. It means that just as Kay would be describing the limitations of thought in his talks, for you to consider that, one needs to consider or be awakened to the limitations of the teachings to get over that bridge or get to the living part. The teachings have to go away in order for the living part to exist. And that has to be something that we remind listeners and visitors to, just as much as we want to encourage them to listen and consider the limitations of thought. So in my notes, the expanded notes that I sent, I began with a quote from a little book that I found in my own personal experience to be wonderful. And it's called The Secret Oral Teachings in Tibetan Buddhist Sects by Alexandra David Neal, basically. And she describes in her introduction how her idea of writing this book, which was a synthesis of these oral teachings, that she wanted to write a book. And she explained that intention to her mentor, or the person who had initiated or brought her into what is called the secret teachings. And he said, it's a waste of time. The great majority of readers and listeners are the same all over the world. I have no doubt that the people in your country are like those I have met in China and India, and these are just like Tibetans. If you speak to them of profound truths, They yawn, and if they dare, they leave you. But if you tell them absurd fables, they're all eyes and ears. They wish the doctrines preached to them, whether religious, philosophic, or social, to be agreeable, to be consistent with their conceptions, to satisfy their inclination. In fact, they find themselves in them, and they feel themselves approved by them. In general, continued the master, we distinguish three kinds of individuals. Those whose intelligence is completely dull, and those whose intelligence are of average quality, able to understand some truths that are especially evident. Those endowed with intelligence better equipped for acute perceptions, who are fit to penetrate below the surface of the world of physical phenomena and grasp the causes which are there at work. It's enough to direct the attention of these last, to say to them, look from this point of view, consider that, and they perceive what is to be perceived and what they've been asked to see. Now, this is what I'm saying is this conversion, right? You basically, the teacher uses metaphors which are always abstract, always conditioned, always limited, and they're inviting the listener to experience something that converts the metaphor to a direct experience or insight in that person. And this is the catalyst. This is the magic of transformation that Kay was always asking for or hoping for, this conversion of the description into insight. And I'm calling that living the teachings. That's my definition of it. This master goes on to say, one may proclaim on the high road that the teachings considered secret will remain secret for individuals with dull minds who will hear what is to be said to them and will grasp nothing but the sound. Now, basically, I'm suggesting that that's what takes place with many, is that they hear it, they hear it intellectually, it stays intellectual, they don't convert it to insight or direct experience, and they're basically in exactly the same state they were. And I included a little image which I had some humor with. I hope you see it. And I have a monk sitting on a bicycle, which is an exercise bike, pedaling, exerting lots of energy, but really going no place. And I think that that's basically what has taken place with many people who investigate the teachings. So with that as an introduction, I would like to play for you. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to play for you my first little clip. And that sound is there, and we'll go after, and then we can come back.
It has been said that Krishnamurti began where Buddha ended. Buddha is supposed to have brought rationality into spirituality. Krishnamurti goes beyond, and he shows us the limitations of thought as a means of psychological mutation. And he shows that pure perception, which is not related to time or to thought, acts. And that perception which acts, that breaks away the pattern of the brain, in which human being has been caught over 1 million years, repeating the same thing over and over again.
So we sat at lunch, and she shared this what she just said with me, and I happened to we had my cameras there, and we stepped outside and I recorded it, because for me this has always been one of the most distilled statements of what sets Kay apart that I've ever heard. It's quite brilliant and quite distilled. A pure perception, uncontaminated by time or thought, acts. And that action creates a change in the brain that releases us from this conditioning that we've had. Now, again, that she's talking about this conversion that I'm talking about to direct perception, and how it's a state that is fundamentally different than what we consider is reality. And I have to say that what we consider reality is the conditioned state. Conditioning is our reality. Kay, I believed, actually lived in a different default state of perception, which is fundamentally different than what most of us experience. And he kept inviting us to discover what this state is, the unconditioned state. And so this statement is quite distilled, and I wanted you to have it. The transcript is in these notes that I sent to you. So now I'm going to give you another view, another perspective. And we'll go here. This also is one of my very favorites.
Yeah, I do feel I was Krishna's biggest failure because I've known him as long as anybody anyway, and I've certainly studied him, I think, more than anybody. I've studied him morning, noon, and night. I've really immersed myself in the teachings. And you know, he once said that if you immersed yourself in the teachings, you couldn't fail to see an improvement every day. I haven't seen an improvement every day. I knew I should probably not see him again, and I wanted to take this opportunity of really coming into contact with him, to really exposing myself, really finding out about this Doris Pratt business. And I said to him, "Sir, I would like to, if I can, lay myself out on the table in front of you so that you can help me to see what I am." He at once jumped in at me, almost sharply, and said, "Miss Pratt, you're like all the rest of them. You come to me with a begging bowl." That really shocked me. It went right through my being. I saw it was true, that I was coming to him with a begging bowl. And I said after a moment or two, "I think I better go and think that over." He said, "Do just that." And with that he got up and walked out of the room. That was the end of my interview. He didn't touch me on the shoulder. He didn't open the door for me. He just left me.
So I would like to say that this, to me, Doris is the poster child of this failure to transform or to convert metaphor into personal insight. So she was with the foundation, or with the Order of the Star in the East, in 1929 when Kay dissolved it. And this interview was done in the 87, I think. So for all these years, she's been studying the teachers morning, noon, and night, and living with and working with and doing everything. And yet at the end of her life, she said, I didn't get it. I didn't do it. So again, the failure here is not on Kay. The failure is on us to see, experience what the metaphor is describing. And that seeing, which is the insight that Padma was referring to, is the living part. And most of us don't do that. We don't get it. So let's go on to another one. What I'd like to do in this next one, this is Samdong Rinpoche again in 1987. And this was the first interview that I did with him. And as you might know, I eventually did 15 hours of interviews with this extraordinary person, because he's the only person in the world who has his experience, his culture, his tradition and training, that spent many years in personal contact and dialogue with Kay, talking about what his message is. So this clip here is the first one, and it's quite extraordinary.
When Buddha teaches the people, he comes down to the level of the listener, whereas the Krishnji doesn't come down to the level of the listener. He always speaks of his own level. The Buddha deals with two labels, namely the relative and the absolute. When Buddha speaks of absolute, I personally do not find any difference with the Krishnaji's teachings or the Krishnaji's teaching with the Buddha's teaching of Parjaparamita or the absolute truth. When Buddha speaks of relative truth, he always compromises with the acceptance and notions and thoughts of people with whom he is speaking. But Krishnaji never compromises or never accepts the conditions or the labels of his listener.
So this is using this a different metaphor. The absolute truth in Buddhist terms is this unconditioned state, what Kay called truth. Basically, his default state, which is the silent mind. That's all this absolute state, the state of the brain. And then there is the relative, which is your thoughts, your conditions, your belief, etc., etc. And as Padma says, Kay's 99% of what Kay was doing with his talks and lectures and so on was pointing out the limitations of thought, what thought is, how it's limited, how it's not intelligent, etc., etc. And to open you up to experience this other state. And it's not a concept. It wasn't a concept. Concepts are always in the realm of the conditioned. So he was asking you to be in this open state. Basically, my way of describing it is every thought that we think is like a muscle tensed. And when we stop that tension, when we release that, which is constricting our attention to what thought is occupying us, the quality of our attention actually expands. And with it, this sensitivity and this sense of relationship without a concept unfolds, and it just keeps expanding and expanding. And your identity of who you experience yourself to be and your relationship to all other things is fundamentally different than when it is constricted and when that attention is constricted and held within the conceptual state. So that's basically my experience of this duality between living the teachings and thinking about them or studying them or reading them or talking about them, etc. So the next one, here comes another one. I hope you don't mind, but this is another breathtakingly wonderful and also rich and complex story. Now I'm going to have to cue it up, so forgive me for a moment. Our friend Achyut.
This is actuality. You can't just imagine this.
I remember an occasion when a Jain monk walked up, travel weary. Must have been about 11 o'clock in the morning, and Krishnaji was just going in for his bath. And he said he had been walking for weeks to get there because he learned that Krishnaji was there. And said it was very urgent that he should see him. And he told Krishnaji that he had been at this game for 14 years, and he said that he was feeling a bit despair. And he thought that if nothing was coming out of it, there was no point in going on living. and he had a sense of urgency that he must find a solution. And Krishnaji smiled and he said, you are trying to find an answer, aren't you, sir? You are trying to find a solution. He said, I would rather change this process and merely look at what you are trying to do with yourself. Look at what thought is trying to do to itself. So he said, the thought is trying to persuade itself and pressurize itself to stop its operations because it wants to get something out of it. And this is something which thought can't do. So you have just to grasp the single fact that what you have been trying to do for 14 years is something which thought has been trying to do, and there is just no way by which thought will ever be able to do it. Just see this, the finality of it, that it is not within the capability of thought to do what you want thought to do. Just see this. Do you see this, sir, what I am saying? The monk was impressed and he said, yes, I do. But he said, you are trying to ask thought to do it for you. Don't do that. That you just watch what thought is doing to itself. And perhaps if you do that and wait, and suddenly there was a change in the appearance of the monk. He closed his eyes and he was quite silent. And after about 4 minutes, he opened his eyes and his eyes were full of tears. And he touched Krishnaji's feet. And then he said that, sir, I have been wanting to get this for a long time and I have not been doing it. So thank you and I'll go. He said, no, don't be in such a hurry. Please sit down for 5 minutes. The monk sat down. He sat quietly, but suddenly he blurted out, sir, I have one more question to ask. He said, of course, I am waiting for that. And he said, well, that was all right. Really, thought was absolutely quiet without my doing anything about it. But how can it last? How can I get it again? And Krishnaji said, that is just the question that I knew you were going to ask me. He said, but who is it that asked the question? The mind that's silent is asking this question, or the mind that was not able to get silent and worrying over it that is asking the question? It is again the old mind. You have gone back to the old mind, and that old mind is asking this question because it wants to possess what you got, it wants to hold on to it and continue it. All this is the normal function of thought. When you had moved out of that room and now you want the answer in this room, that is, you want the answer to be with thought. Do you see what you are doing? Do you see, sir, what thought is doing to you? Do you see what thought is doing to itself? And again the monk went silent. And this time he was silent for a while. And he opened eyes that were full of peace. And he touched Krishnaji's feet and said, sir, I will not come to you again.
So two points. There are many points to be made in this little clip, but in that first episode with the Jain monk, when suddenly his eyes went quiet, there was something that happened to this monk in that first thing. And this is that conversion that I'm talking about from metaphor to insight. And that happened. And he got it. It was that this is this magical thing that happened to him. And it was there for a little while, and then of course the thought process began again, came back in, the conditioning process, and how can I get it back, etc., etc. And so then he re-experienced it and understood the insight and went back to the insight. He went back from the he left the cognitive again. He left that state, like turning on the lights in a room. The state changed, and he was had a silent mind, or was in the absolute or the unconditioned. And I love the closing line he said, I'll not come and see you again. And this is my main point, that if in fact we were giving this quality of attention to this metaphor and really looking when Alexander David Neal said there are different qualities of attention or different qualities of mind, the dull, the average, and the bright, to use my words. All you need to do is point to the bright mind, and they will grasp what is supposed to be seen. They will have the insight or the experience, and they will move on. And the others, you could talk until you're blue in the face, and they're going to stay in that cognitive space and not have the conversion of metaphor to insight, not live the teachings, and they'll just go on with it. And as Doris is my example, this is not an uncommon example. So this is something that we all deal with. And that's why Achyut's story is so wonderful. And I loved it when I heard it. And I will not come and see you again. Partially because at that point, I had been researching these, the biography. Mary Letchins came out with the Years of Awakening just as I was beginning my documentary on with the Challenge of Change. And I had just read transcripts of the questions and the interviews going back into the 20s and 30s. And I realized that it was the same audience in the 1980s. It was the same audience asking the same questions that he had been asked in the 20s. Nothing had changed in terms of the quality of the audience. And he just kept at it, as Professor Krishna had shared with me. He would always come back fresh and strong and hit it again, regardless of who it was. Now, the difference with K and also the story of the Buddha is that unlike the secret teachings in the Tibetan tradition, in the Tibetan tradition, they say it's a waste of time to share these pearls with most people because they don't have the capacity to get it. That's a strong statement that everybody's going to bristle at. But they just shake their head, and as the master who initiated Alexander David Neal said, it's a waste of time. Most are not going to get it. It's only going to be frustrating for me and for them. So they reserve it for those people who they feel have the capacity for this conversion of metaphor to insight. Kay didn't do that. Kay spoke to everybody, and only those with the capacity were able to make this conversion. So that is a very strong point, but I think a valid point, and has a very strong tradition behind it. Let's go on to another. This is also Samdong Rinpoche. This was done in Brockwood. Wow, this was 2012.
Did you discuss with Krishnaji the process? Kay did not seem to believe it was the Kundalini. Are there any parallel experiences in your tradition to the things Kay experienced during these altered states that are called the process?
I did never discuss anything about the Kay's own process or process in general. And we never discussed Kundalini. I never remember even he mentioned about Kundalini. Right. Kundalini is a very typical way of practicing Tantra. In Buddhism, it is quite different. In a Hindu tradition, there are many ways of talking about Kundalini, but I never heard or I never discussed with Kay about this. When Kay says that the transformation must be taking place by your own self, nobody can give you the transformation. For the Buddhist listeners, they always remember exactly, Buddha have also said that Buddha cannot give you the transformation. Buddha cannot transfer his realization. Buddha cannot wash away the individual's demerits. Buddha can only give the direction how to achieve the transformation, and the transformation need to be achieved by oneself. Buddha can only talk about the transformation, and the talking about is also not the way to achieve transformation. After listening to Buddha, the seeker or the listener who have an intention to search the truth and have transformation, then all the effort shall have to be made by oneself. And the truth has to be discovered by individual oneself, whosoever it may be. No one can search the truth on behalf of someone else. So this is a very similar statement of Buddha and K. Then regarding knowledge and time, knowledge, the English expression, is used in many different ways, in different contexts, but K uses knowledge invariably, almost all the time. When he used the expression knowledge, he is referring to the knowledge in the realm of thought, not knowledge, not the realm of perception. The perception he does not count in the. It may know, but it is not in the category of knowledge.
Are you saying, if I may, that perception itself is a form of knowledge? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in many other text, perception is also referred as knowledge, because the perception sees, perception knows the reality, and here the K is referring knowledge in the realm of thought, and similarly Buddha also says the knowledge in the realm of thought cannot give you the insight or cannot give you the transformation. And then the Buddhist way of understanding is the knowledge in the realm of thought, which is in the direction of truth, transforms into nature of perception. That is the transformation, and that happens in time, but the time has no control over that transformation, and therefore the transformation is spontaneous, and it is not gradually or partially. There are only two states: the awakened state, unawakened state. There is no half awakened or partially awakened. So therefore, the time has no role to play in the transmutation of a individual's mind. The time has nothing to do. Also the knowledge of thought realm has nothing to do. Just like the Buddhist literature many times take the metaphor of darkness and the light. And then light appears. The moment of appearance of light and the moment of disappearance of darkness has no time difference. It is spontaneous. And then this also says you cannot ask or you cannot question where the darkness has gone. And there is no trace about the darkness. It simply do not exist there. Only the light is there, and that is the awakening or transformation. So they are quite similar.
It's
So I selected this clip because it's supporting my thesis of this conversion from metaphor to insight. And he used the word perception, that perception in many traditions is a form of knowledge. There's wisdom, that's what Padma was pointing to. Direct perception, unmediated by conditioning or thought, acts, she said. And that action is based on what we might call a form of knowledge, but it's not conditioned knowledge. It's this other quality completely. So I love this because he's just basically describing that you listen to the metaphor and then something happens inside you where that metaphor is converted into a personal experience, and the metaphor disappears just like the darkness. You don't need it doesn't exist. It's gone. So the search is gone, the need to study is gone, the teachings are gone, all of those things are gone. And there's another state. And this, I think, is the conversion, if you will, that Kay's whole life was trying to serve as a catalyst for. Let's go on to another. I want you to see a couple more, and then we can break it up into discussion if you'd like.
K do not refer any graduation, any method, any effort to begin from here to reach there. He negates all these things. And I think for that he do it with a specific purpose. This is my understanding. You should not consider it my interpretation or my commentary on K, but how I understand when I listen to K.
now you must have talked to him about this.
Yes,
Yeah, of
yes,
course.
yes,
This would
many
be-
times,
this
yes.
would be so
Yes, so
so close
important.
to you.
Yes,
How could
that's
you
right.
not?
Yeah. K does it very rightly to shake you so forcefully from the root, because you are so deeply rooted into your conditioning. And by that conditioning, you convert all the things, including spirituality and religion, into a cause of conditioning. So unless and until you are shaken and forcefully awake, otherwise whatever he would tell you, we shall convert it into an ism or a cause of conditioning. All the methods, or the graduation, or the process of meditation become a reinforcement of our conditioning. And how to take away from that conditioning, he have to negate everything. There is a metaphor in Buddhist treatises. If your cloth is full of dirt and it become unusable, you shall have to put the entire cloth into the water and wash it entirely. And you can not only wash the dirt and the cloth remain dry. So you put everything into the water and then dirt will go. And after removing the entire dirt, your cloth still remain there, then it will be uncontaminated, not polluted, or the clean cloth will be remain there. So similarly, K rejects everything on one slot, because our mind is incapable of differentiating what is to be negated and what is to be remain.
You know, this notion of translation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Here you have K.
Yeah.
In another realm.
Right.
Another reality.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's pointing.
Yeah.
Describing and
right.
pointing.
Yes, pointing to the.
And then we listen to it and convert it back into our
conditioning.
conditioning.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Over and over and over again. So we only hear ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't really hear what he's saying.
Yes, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just so.
Mm-hmm.
It's so great. It's so not obvious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not obvious
right.
at all.
Yes.
But it's so clear.
Yeah. So that is why we, the few number of Buddhists who have listened to K, we always say he helped a great deal for understanding Buddha in more clarity and differentiate how we have polluted the understanding of Buddha's teaching, which he has cleared. And his powerful negation and rejecting all this, our mind holding on.
Because even as a monk,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You're a translator. You're going to translate
yes,
too.
Yes, right. Yes.
Even though you're trying and you're
yes,
doing the studies
yes,
and
exactly.
you're doing the methods
yes,
and all that stuff,
yes.
You're still in the same boat.
In the same boat.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we also refer back to Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna was more radical sometimes than K. He rejects even Buddha. He rejects even the karma and karmic theory system, and he rejects everything. But his rejection and K's rejection, if you compare them closely, they are all similar. After rejecting everything, then what is to be remain, that will come more clearly.
Is that because the concept of karma is more conditioned? Is that what?
Sometimes, yes,
yeah?
yes.
I'm
yes.
just wondering, when you say that Narajuna, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, Nagarjuna. Yeah.
When he negated the Buddha and
Yeah.
negated karma and
Yeah.
some of these core
The
things.
nirvana, everything.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
because
All this we have made then a cause of conditioning. By that way he negates.
So that's why I sent you the transcripts of these clips so that you can go over them and read them, because you have to kind of sit with these to really get, I've been listening to these for many years, but for somebody who's new to what these things contain, it's extremely distilled, it's very rich. So I hope that you do take advantage of the transcripts that I sent along to you. We are at the hour. I have 2 more clips. That's going to be another 10 minutes, 10, 15, 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes. I'd love to share them with you, or we can stop here and, open this for discussion.
Michael, please go ahead. Go ahead. Complete.
Yeah, I think it's important. These are great. These are great highlights, very distilled highlights. So again, one more with Rinpoche and then one with K.
Sure. Please go ahead.
with this in mind, I got up this morning, and this was at 6, or the sun was just coming up, and so I came to the temple here, and there were the monks, and they were doing their chanting. They were together in 2 rows, and they had their books.
Yes. Yes, chanting, yeah.
And the harmonics of the chant, the prayers or whatever it was that they were doing.
Right.
The beads, people walking, they were walking around the circle doing their walk.
Yes.
They were doing their beads, they were doing mantras.
Yeah.
Now, my question, and this is a hard question, what's the difference? I'm very unhappy about people with their telephones. They're walking around all day like this. They're scrolling and doing things. Well, it seems very similar. So help me with this, because here's a technological tradition that is capturing the mind, right? Occupying it. Here's a so-called spiritual tradition where people are very committed. And yet, from my perspective, from what I've listened to from Krishnamurti's standpoint, they're equally occupied.
Yes, exactly.
So how can they do this and not be occupied, I guess, is my question. How can you, and I wrote about you yourself. I said, how can you continue to do some of these so-called practices and not, isn't it a form of self-hypnosis? How do you practice these things and have them not be a distraction or a hypnotic kind of thing?
That's exactly what I am trying to say, that chanting become a repetitive ritual. Counting the beads also a repetitive ritual. And all this make no difference to the mind of the person. So there is no practicing, only conditioning, and which need to be rejected. Either a Buddhist or either a Krishnamurti or either anybody. In a non-believer, they will also reject it, and even a believer, a Buddhist would say, you are doing nothing. So I have a very clear example from the Atisha's biography. When Atisha was visiting the center temple of Lhasa, and he was just making a around the temple, and a person was reading a book, sitting cross-legged, and he wished Atisha give blessings. Gentleman, it's good reading the book, but why don't you practice the dharma?
And the book was on dharma, I assume.
Book is, of course.
Yes, yes, of course.
Why don't you practice the dharma? Then he was shocked. I'm practicing dharma, I'm reading the dharma book. But Atisha was not happy. Oh, I think I should do some prostration. Then next time Atisha was visiting there, he was making prostration before the temple. And perspirations are coming down with that rigorous prostration. Then Atisha smelled, oh good, you are doing some exercise. Why don't you practice the dharma? Then he puzzled. Then the third time, he was just repeating some mantra, closed-eyed, with beads. Then that's I've said again, yes, reciting mantra is also not bad, but why don't you practice the dharma? Then he completely confused, and then he asked Atisha what I should do. Atisha said, change your mind. So it is not quoting from K, or it is not quoting from anything. It is completely within the Buddhist tradition, orthodox Buddhist tradition, and it fixed there.
Yeah.
It's fixed there.
Two brief comments about this, and then we'll go on to Kay. One is when the teacher, the Arta Shah, I believe is the name, said, why don't you practice the Dharma? We need to translate that into our K vernacular and say, why don't you live the teachings? That's basically the simile that this clip is talking about. They read the books, they did the mantras, they watched the videos, they participated in Zoom meetings, they did all those things. And we need to get back, why don't you practice the Dharma? And then the guy was all confused and he says, well, tell me what to do. And basically his response was, change your mind. And the change of the mind is what the whole thing is about, which is this conversion of the metaphor to personal insight. With that, everything changes. Without that, nothing changes. That's the point. So let's go on now to the last one, which is K. This is another wonderful piece. I hope you enjoy it. Again, forgive me, I have to find it and cue it up.
And that is the living teaching, in my view.
Your life, what is your life? What is that life that you daily live? Dependence, attachment, pain, annoyance, anger, irritation, sorrow. You know all this, don't you? This is your daily life. Going to the temple and doing some kind of noise with the bell and doing puja, doing yoga. That we say that is our life. Then what do you mean by a religious life? You tell me, what does religion mean to you? The word religion means to gather all your energy That's all they mean. You understand, sir? To gather all your energy to inquire, to find. Right? Would you? Not all the nonsense of temples, rituals, and all this either, sir. What you put on your head. You see how you all agree? The meaning of the word. That means gathering every particle of energy that you have to inquire into what is truth and what is reality, to inquire into what is meditation, to inquire into why human beings live the way we are living, to inquire if there is an end to sorrow, to inquire into what is love, whether one can live without any effort, and control all that is implied in that word. A religious life implies being a light to yourself, which means no outside authority, including me, the speaker. Have you any authority? Spiritual authority? You have had various Guru Mahatma, Mr. Gandhi, and so on, all the way from the 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd century, down to the present. And where are you, having been led for these thousands of years? Where are you? Or you want to be still led? So I'm asking, we are asking you courteously, if you have thrown away your traditions. Traditions being nationality, your caste, your beliefs, your rituals, going to the temples, all that. Have you thrown it away? No? No. Then how can you find out what a religious life is when you are blind? So you want to find out what a religious life is, and yet won't leave your little enclosure. Right? You are tied to your tradition, and you want to inquire into something that demands a mind that is capable, a heart that can really love. Without that, freeing yourself from your tradition, your culture, your belief, how can you find out anything? You can repeat what the Gita said, or the Upanishads, or some other book. What value has it? What are we all playing at, sirs? Apparently, one doesn't see one's own tragedy. Right, sir?
Another extraordinarily rich few moments. There's so much in here. I would like to focus on a couple of points that he made that I think are critical to understand. One is we think of paying attention, gathering every particle of attention that you have to inquire, he said. Now, to our relative reality mind, that inquiry is thought, is analysis, is discussion, is, again, the best word is analysis. But in Kay's use of that word, he's talking more about perception than he is analysis. If we go to what Rinpoche talked about, that perception itself, or what Padma was reiterating, perception itself acts. That's what he's talking about, not analysis, or not dialogue, or not tearing things apart in a discourse. It is the silent mind perceiving directly what is love, why we live the way that we are living, all of those various themes that Kay enunciated. That direct perception comes not through analysis or through intellect, because that intellect is gone in order to not be blinded by it, which was his wonderful point. So you throw, when he says can you live without the teacher or the book or any of these things, none of those exist. As Rinpoche said, when the light goes on, all of those things disappear. They simply don't exist in the state that he's inviting. And then there's direct perception, and then there's action from a completely different standpoint. And that, in my view, is what he means and what I mean by living the teachings. So we have a few more minutes, and I'm happy to make up answers to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot for bringing such a difficult topic to this stage. I think Krishna's teachings basically show us the door, but the walking has to be done by us if we have the energy and the time to do it. Like Krishna said in the last recording that we showed us, that we want to get transformed without changing our life. We want to live the way we are and want to be transformed. And that can't happen. I think before I take up questions, I don't think there is much to be asked for after this talk, but I would like Professor Krishna and Dr. Gajanan Rao to say a few words before we go to Harshad Bhai and Dinesh Wagmare and Shankar. So Professor Krishna, sir, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I would like to ask Michael a question that would occur to a layman, and I consider myself to be a layman. When Krishna says, stay with questions, inquire, there are so many different illusions in our mind. The conditioning is not just one thing. There is a plethora of illusions, false notions, not aware that they are false, which block or color our perception, and therefore this transformation that Michael talked about of going from the idea to the perception doesn't happen. So when such a man starts inquiring, there will be the more superficial illusions which will go first. There are superstitions, there are religious beliefs, notions of extremism. Then there are psychological complexes derived from one's childhood and all that. And more deep-rooted beliefs which one acquires from society, that you have to compete, you have to do better than the others, and what is the notion of success and so on. So there are a whole lot of illusions. And as Krishnaji pointed out, even to find out what is really love, nobody asks these questions in our education. So to end an illusion, you have to see its falseness. And that's not just an intellectual process. That is a seeing. But it's only a partial insight because it ends one particular illusion. And after that, there are deeper illusions. And finally, there is the illusion of being a separate self, which we don't know whether it's really an illusion, but that's what the sages have pointed out, including Krishnaji. So to see that also, you have to go that deep, dig that deep. The perception has to be as deep as the illusion in order for the illusion to be extricated. So it is true that time does not help you, but time passes irrespective of whether you have a perception or you don't have a perception, because the earth is not going to stop going around the sun, whatever you may do. So the chronological time keeps advancing. You may not get that perception, but to have that ultimate perception of being one with everything else and not a separate self, your awareness or your energy, whatever word you wish to call, has to come to that level of intensity and depth. And that can take a whole lifetime, or may take, you may never get to it. So what happens is that you start inquiring and you free yourself of the more superficial illusions, which also brings about change. It's not, because every illusion creates some disorder in life, and you have freed yourself of that disorder. For instance, if you understand that it's a disease of the mind to compare oneself with others all the time, and so you stop doing that, you're not totally free, but you're free of feelings of inferiority, superiority, rivalry, competition, jealousy, envy, a whole lot. And naturally, then you have much more energy because you're no longer wasting your energy on all these disorders of consciousness. So this process of collecting all your energy is a process of ending the illusions in the mind, which is called self-knowledge, which is discerning what is true and what is false. It's true that every perception, it doesn't come with time, but since the energy grows as you free your mind of illusions, you have a better possibility to go deeper into it. So I'd just like to, it's not really a question, but ultimately, you need to see the whole of the ego field at one go, as Krishnaji has talked about, to get out of it. And that may not happen. But as you start inquiring, you free your mind of so many illusions and change takes place in your life, which is what is called growing in wisdom. You grow in knowledge, we know all that. You also can grow in wisdom. But total freedom eludes you. Even the wise people are very few people are totally free. I mean, there was the Buddha, there was Christ, people who are completely broken away from their past. May not happen to you. So I would not say that this inquiry has no value, no purpose, unless you attain total freedom. What would you say to that, Michael?
Well, first of all, I would redefine the word inquiry. That's the most important fundamental shift. Remember we talked about conversion, Rinpoche talked about conversion. K is in a different state. He's in the absolute, we're in the relative. He speaks his truth from a relative, or excuse me, from an absolute perspective, and we hear it with our relative ears. And so in order to understand what he's saying, we have to convert his truth into our relative reality in order for us to say, oh, I understand. So we convert, we're only listening to ourselves, really. We're not listening to what he said. So that's number one. Now, number two, when his last little piece that we were talking about, you need to gather every particle of energy and attention that you have. And then he says to inquire into this and inquire into that and to inquire into this. And we, in our relative state, understand inquiry as analysis. We're still in the relative state. We're analyzing, we're dissecting, we're processing, we're dealing, well, what about this? And let's negate that. We're like the monk. We're like the Jain monk in Achyut's story, right? We're stuck there. We're just like Doris, right? We're analyzing ourselves. We're talking to ourselves. There's no fundamental shift of the state of the mind, which is the lightness and the dark, or turning on the light that Rinpoche talked about. So I have to redefine. I redefine the word inquiry because we use it a lot in the quote K circles. We're going to have a dialogue and inquire together. And inquiry in that regard is more or less the same thing. We're just shooting the breeze. We're just talking together and analyzing and arguing and debating. And that's not what K means by inquiry. What K means by inquiry is ending that state, freeing attention to open up to its uncontaminated, shall we say, pristine nature, and observing directly what's taking place. That's inquiry. It's not analysis. It has nothing to do with conditioning or intellect or trying to solve problems. Zip. It's not, inquiry is not that. So I think that there's a huge confusion with the word inquiry because it feeds that intellect and let's go after it. When I was in the Rishi Valley, and Sunanda, I'm from LA and pretty young at that time, had never been to India, and we're sitting out underneath the trees, and Sunanda says, well, Michael, you have to understand the Indian mind. And Mark Lee and I talked about that, and this Brahmanical tradition of really getting into it and digging, using that intellect in a very analytical way. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing, but it's not what Kay meant by inquiry. He meant having a silent mind and letting that direct perception see what is. That's what he meant by inquire, not analysis. So that's, first of all, that would be my thing. The other thing I would say is, as Rinpoche said, there's only two states. There's awake and unawake. And Kay was simply, he didn't care about all the problems. He talked about all the problems that thought creates because he wanted you to understand the infinite limitations of what thought is, that we believe in, that we identify with, and that we can't get out of. It's like I use the metaphor of a house of mirrors. And we're in this house of mirrors, which is all our conditioning and thoughts, and we're just seeing all these reflections, and one reflection bounces off another. And that's kind of my image of the relative reality and thought. And Kay's saying that that's the small corner of the big field. The big field is this quality of mind that is free from all of those distractions. And to be in that state is inquiry. It's not analysis. So that's the big deal. So is there usefulness in practices? And Rinpoche and I talk about this at great length. Of course there is. But again, I'm going to say, as he did so brilliantly, beads, reading, studying the teachings, watching the videos over and over and over again, become more conditioning. Without this conversion of the metaphor to personal insight, all of it is conditioning. It stays conditioning. We think that we're treading water or really doing something. And that's why Doris's presentation is so, poetic, right? Because she dedicated her life more than anybody that she knew. And I think she, like I say, is the poster child for most of us. We don't make this conversion. We don't pay attention in the way that Kay is talking about. We don't listen with that complete energy and attention to bring about that insight. We stay kind of superficial and analytical, and we stay in that relative reality, and it's like a pinball machine. So that's my commentary. It's a radical shift of definition of the word inquiry, which I think is terribly misleading. And I think that he's only talking about one transformation, which is the ending of that relative conditioned state into a completely different state where that activity is absent. And that's what he hoped for. That's what he kept throwing water at us at, pushing us into the corner so that we would do it. We would make that conversion of concept to insight. Very few do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. We have already crossed our time, so we'll extend it by 10 minutes. And after Dr. Gajanan Rao, we can have just one or two comments, maybe Dr. Harshad Parekh and Mr. Pradeep Verma. So, Dr. Gajanan Rao, sir, please go ahead.
I should just, can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Yes, we can, sir.
Thanks, Michael, sir. Really, it was a great time we had with you, and explained everything that, including the last one you stayed on in what we mentioned in inquiry. It's really great because there's a lot of misconception about this word. And then conversion is what you very often mention, which I hadn't heard before. Going into that word, I also had a, can I say, perception that the content, not the body of anything, and that transforms into you as something of a perception, was really great. But then only one thing to say. Of course, the whole lot of tradition, as we call it, in any language, in any religion, it's too long a thing or too robust a thing. We can never think of uprooting. That was a good thing you brought when you said a man sitting on a cycle, which is stable and exercising. You may do a lot of it, but you don't move 1 inch. And when Rinpoche mentioning about the beads and the ritualistic chants, nothing. I remember this. So analysis, as Krishna says, is out of question. You can keep analyzing another 4 janmas. You never remove tradition to be out of you. So then the perception is all that we left with. The perception should be in a state of mind where isn't anything else co-functioning or coexisting. So that perception will be, of course, of no time, but of now. So K put a lot of emphasis on the now. Anything is now. not on the past or the future. I may be wrong, but I had a glimpse of this understanding when he was talking about now. Now can stay on, in the sense not in terms of time, but in the now, without the past coming in or getting to the future quickly, the now can stay on. And that's the time I think inquiry begins. Not in words, but the now could be, that's the only place where a conversion or a complete insight or a change can take place. So, which really, so therefore, it puts away all our analysis, our sitting and learning, books, tapes, everything. But you needed a guide. You can't reject all that. Krishna also said, immerse, soak in the teachings. You read a book, you soak in teaching. Second time you read the same book, you soak a little more. But that is of this point, and of its coming to use also in time of your inquiry. Without knowledge of it, there is a kind of a help or a guidance you cannot deny. So I'm only saying this, that it's good we heard all these people, including Achuji. So God, thank you very much, Michael, putting all of them to us. So, and your own sayings on this, your impressions on this. Well, I won't say I'm out of confusion completely, but I only think that perception and the now are important to hang on to if you want to get to anything. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So let me say briefly that the again, there's a most of us are not grounded in silence. We are not grounded in direct perception. We're grounded. The state of our mind is, this is the conditioning issue. The state of our mind is enchanted by language, culture, all those images. We are enchanted. So call it Maya, call it all illusion, call it whatever you want, but that's our reality. We are in that reality. And like I said, when we listen to Kay and he's talking about another reality, another state, we don't have the direct experience of that. So we hear it in our state, and we try to understand it in our context, the state we're in, and we run around like a mouse in a cage, and we talk to ourselves, and we read books, and we do all that. That's all within the same state. But if you think about this as state specific instead of concept specific, or as a concept, then it's much easier, I think, because he's really talking about a change in the state of the brain, the state of the mind, the state of perception, not its content. So there isn't yes, you could spend the rest of your life, as Dr. Krishna said, by digging through and trying to understand your conditioning and what happened when you were a kid, and your personality and all of that. You could kind of be Freudian about it. Kay was not interested in that. He saw that as all part of this relative reality, and he said there's another way of living, another way of being. Now, what he had that we don't, which is kind of our handicap, is that he was grounded in what the Buddhists would call the absolute, or silence, or direct perception, however you want to say it. That was his ground. That was his default state. And then thought would come in, and he would use thought as a tool, as it properly is. He didn't get carried away with the tool. He didn't identify with the tool. He wasn't a Buddhist. He wasn't a nationalist. He didn't identify with the tool. He didn't become the tool. He didn't become a hammer and then go around hitting everything with it. He didn't do that. We do. We think that we're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a caste or a Republican or a Christian or whatever it is. We identify with the tool, which is crazy. It's a misuse, a misunderstanding of the whole mental process, because we're enchanted. We don't have any other reference. So that's what he was really trying to get us to do, was to discover that there's another state. And and once we discover that other state as a direct perception or insight, then thought takes its proper place as a tool, incisive, like a scientist, he would say. Perfectly right. You want to use memory, you want to use your conditioning to change the tire, to bake the cake, to tie your shoes. This is a very useful thing. Memory is a very useful thing. We don't want to throw it out. But we don't want to identify with it. We are not the recipe of how you bake the cake. We don't identify with it. But we identify with it. What's it called? Reification. We take these abstract concepts and we reify it. We treat the tool as though it were an independent reality. And then we identify with it and say, that's who I am. And that's just totally crazy. But you can't see that if you're just stuck in the one reality. You need to experience this other state, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's a tool. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not what I thought. I'm not Michael, right? I'm not what I thought I was, because the illusion or that enchantment is broken with the insight.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. We'll hear Dr. Parekh and Mr. Pradeep Verma brief statements. Dr. Parekh, please.
Yes. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. One important thing which I read in Krishnamurti is the word is not the thing. And when he's talking with an artist, Krishnaji said, the word parrot has blocked you from looking at the thing which flies. So all these verbal understanding concepts, it doesn't mean much. Intellectually, we can become very, very clear, but the real thing is looking at the thing. How do we look at a tree or a human being, whether our mind is very silent when we are looking and we really see the real beauty. So two people had come to Krishnaji and they were saying to Krishnaji that the more we have discussed about love, the clearer it has become. And Krishnaji asked, has love become clear, or what do you think about it? So all this intellectual understanding, it means really nothing as long as we are not able to see what is beyond the world, the real beauty which exists in that state where we can really see the real tree, not the word tree. Okay, I finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parekh. Yes, Mr. Verma, the last question.
Yes, sir. This is what I see. Heart in heart, I feel that these are important, but somehow people, we have undermined these things. You know, intelligence works through mind-body complex. Specific individual must be important for the universal intelligence, for its proper working, you may call awakening. How important is this mind-body complex to you, for you, Mr. Michael? Then, secondly, for you, images must be very important, that you chose to capture and share the essence through images. How important are images for you? Third, each query has a base of words and images. At least this is what I feel. All my queries have a base of words and images. Then another small question is, through negation, can whole sustain itself? Whole, can it sustain through negation? Another one, small one, is energy associated with awakening qualitatively different? These are small questions. Thank you very much for giving me time when it was so hard pressed.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know that I'm up to answering, because each of those questions are wonderful and would take some consideration to do them justice. If you would like, please send them to me, and I will respond to them with some depth as much as I can. I think they're great questions. I love the one about here. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm saying, what about images? That's a great question. I appreciate it very much. I'm simply going to try to make it really simple. I do think that we overcomplicate what Kay was saying immensely. As he said, as I said in the very beginning, this is so damn simple. Even a child can get it, but we, with our conditioning, make it much more complicated than it is. Kay is first of all, if you're totally within the realm of the thought realm, that's all there is. That's your reality. And it's so powerful. The capacity for the human brain, the neocortex, to create these images is really at the root of this whole thing. Now, it's a very specialized capacity to create mental images of things not present to the senses. This is called, it's a classic definition of imagination. So we have the capacity to imagine. But as David Bohm went into, we have not evolved proprioception of our imagination, right? So we lose track of what's going on. And like a dog chasing its tail, we think that we're chasing the enemy, but we're actually doing it and we don't realize it. So we get lost in the evocative power of these mental images, and we identify with them. And you could trace this back to our more ancient roots, because when perceptions came in, we accepted that was truth, right? If you hear the crack in the forest of the tree, that could be a predator and your life was at stake, so you had to pay really careful attention to it. Now look what we're doing with media. We have no reference, no concrete reference. It's all completely relative, and our poor imaginations are obliterated. It has no ground. And what Kay is trying to do is to help us ground that imagination in something real, something much bigger, not get lost in the tool. And without the ground, you can't have above without the context. You can't have it be a tool without having the ground. You need the ground in order to understand that thought is a tool, that this is an image. And that's fundamentally what he was asking us to do. And once you get it, once you get that ground, everything he says makes sense. It's absolutely crystal clear, as simple, and every child should be able to get it because he was so clear about what he said. So anyway, that's my first response, is that we really overcomplicate it, and we are without discovering this ground, whatever name you want to call it, then the tool takes over and we're lost. And we're blind, as Kay said in Madras. So you need to have the ground in order for thought to take its right place as an amazing creative tool. Then, as Rinpoche talked about Tantra, you can use thought in a like a laser, in a very creative, causal way, and actually change yourself and change reality based on what that is. But that's a whole nother discussion. So thank you for inviting me. It was a lot of fun to prepare. I love the clips. I think they're great. I hope you enjoyed them, and do read the transcripts. They're really amazing.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. You have to declare the next lecture.
Thank you, Michael, for sparing your time. It was really a wonderful presentation, and thank you so much for those beautiful clips.
They're great. Yeah, it's lovely to share. I mean, I know all these things really intimately, and it's lovely to share them with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
You have to call him again. Dubey sir, you have to call him again.
Yeah, we'll write to him later.
Already 20 minutes have passed. Yeah. Sir, would you please announce next lecture of Professor Krishna?
You have already done that. What do you want me to do now?
No, but just that art of living.
So Professor Krishna will be talking to us next Sunday at 11 o'clock, and the theme is the art of living. So you're all welcome to join. Please do join us next Sunday at 11 a.m. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dubey sir. Thank you very much. Modak, you can close it.